Hello, guys, and welcome back to the Backstage Bikini podcast with your host, Grace.
And Jade.
So, for our first episode, we'd like to welcome on a very special person and a good friend of mine, Paul Standell. He is an educator at the PT Project, and he also works with online with a lot of athletes to help them improve their body composition, heal the relationship with food, etc., etc. And he's absolutely incredible at what he does, and he's helped me a lot with my kind of post shows and dealing with my thoughts around that. So, Paul, do you want to kind of introduce yourself? Tell the listeners kind of who you are, what kind of got you into the industry, and where your kind of experience lies within bodybuilding and stuff like that.
Sure, we can definitely go into that. So I'm Paul. Those of you who are listening and don't know me, welcome to my voice. So I've been a PT this is my 12th year coming up now. And as Grace said, I run a company called the PT Project, which is an education company, which tries to, well, as the name suggests, educate PTs in all of the facets that might make them better at their career. We do a bunch of biomechanics, but a lot of my background also involves a bunch of psychology, which is kind of what we're going to talk about here today. I did my first bodybuilding show back in 2014, I think it was. So it's a fair few years. And then my last one was 4 years ago now, so pre-pandemic, within there. And, anyone who goes through a bodybuilding prep of any kind is going to be pretty familiar with the ups and downs and the roller coaster that goes alongside that. But I also, my own story involves OCD. I had obsessive compulsive disorder and went through therapy and treatment for that. And being a person who works in the fitness industry, I've dated more people with eating disorders than I care to count. And from a mixture of all of these bits and pieces, I wrote an ebook. We're talking now back in 2000 I want to say 18 when I put this thing out. So a little while ago, probably before really anyone was properly talking about this, because I was kind of like, the ebook actually for me, which is on getting your head straight after getting shredded. That's what it's called, right? And it initially was just a reflection on the last prep that I did for a Pure Elite show. This was back in 2018, I think it was. And it was, the lessons that you've learned. And as you start to put these things together, you're kind of like, okay, I need to explain that a little bit more, and then maybe that a little bit more. And this thing that started as what was going to be a blog post just ballooned and ballooned into quite a big magnum opus, as it were, on this particular topic. I was like, okay, this just needs to be an ebook. This is big. And then I tried to weave all the things that go together through the story of an imaginary bikini competitor called Steph and her journey through all these bits and pieces. And then since then, that went pretty well, and a bunch of people got to kind of know me, and a lot of that comes from word of mouth. I don't really advertise this part of what I do all that much, so most people who come with this come from people like Grace or other people I've worked with who are like, oh, Paul's really useful for that. And so, that's probably enough of my background, because people will be bored of listening to my waffle about me. So let's shall we get into the topic?
That's brilliant. No, that explains perfectly, I suppose, why we wanted to get you on. And I know it's not something you advertise, but there isn't many in the industry, I suppose, doing what you're doing and helping competitors and doing consults with them without, I suppose, talking very, very negatively about the sport. And that's what I really, really like about you since I first met you and you were working on the Muscle Mentors is, you were able to speak about these things, but not shine a really negative light on the sport or make people completely turn their heads against it. You wanted to educate them as to why they're feeling a certain way and try and just bring that awareness and have them make informed decisions themselves, and that's why I wanted to get you on to kind of speak more about it.
Yeah, like the initial title I had for my ebook was a terrible title, for the record, but it was called The Almost Inevitable Problem of Anxiety and Dieting, which is way less good than getting your head straight after getting shredded, let's face facts. But the point of calling it the almost inevitable problem, not the inevitable problem of anxiety and dieting, is a lot of the things that coalesce in a prep for someone who's drawn towards that, with all the behaviors you have to engage in and all the stuff that goes alongside it, is on the backside of it, you are almost inevitably setting yourself up for a hard time. And if you don't have the right skills and the right approach to it, you're going to have a really hard time. But if you get the right stuff in place, you can completely manage this stuff and have a perfectly lovely relationship with bodybuilding and have it be a positive thing in your life, not a destructive thing in your life. And I think a lot of the industry seems to miss that. And people get really polarized into, no, either it's terrible for you, no one should ever do it, or nah, fuck it, it's completely fine and there's no issues. And you're like, well, no, the reality is somewhere between those two things.
Yeah.
So coming back to that, Paul, obviously you said that it's almost an inevitable, and I really like that phrase specifically because, like you say, a lot of it is, to a degree, I find, was within my control in terms of controlling the outcomes, preparing yourself for that sort of inevitable struggle, or in this instance, not so much so, so long as you are equipped for it. So what are the most common things that you find that people actually run into when you're talking about the almost inevitable?
So I think the first prep that someone goes through is likely to be the most difficult one. And with every time someone goes through it, not always, but generally, if someone can repeatedly go through dieting, coming out the backside of it, dieting, coming out the backside of it over several years, they're probably already developing a bunch of skills to navigate those waters, right? Because they're kind of murky waters when you first go into it. You know, the first time you decide to get lean, you're aiming at a thing you've never been to before. You've no idea what it feels like. It doesn't matter how much people warn you and tell you about stuff. Human beings learn from their own experiences and their own errors more than just being told or warned anything. So you kind of have to go through that. And it's a bit like, you know, that feels sometimes when you do your first one so far away that to think, what do you mean think about afterwards? I haven't even got there yet. That feels a bit, you know, presumptive. And so people kind of don't. And then they come out the backside and they think, you know, that maybe they have a big meal or two post the actual, it can be either a show or a photo shoot. In some sense, some of the things are pretty similar between these processes. And yeah, and then they think, oh, okay, I've had my big meal, or maybe a day, or maybe even a couple of days. I've got it out of my system now, and so I will be fine. Tomorrow, I'm going to get back on track. I'm going to have my normal meals. Everything's going to be gravy. And then it isn't, right? And so after, you know, a few hours, those little thoughts that previously when you were dieting, because look, when you're getting very, very lean, your brain is basically doing this. Fuck me, I'm hungry. Let's think about food. I am tired. We should think about food some more. Have you guys considered eating? Hey guys, we should eat. Would you want to eat? Right? And the only thing, or one of the only things that keeps you from going, shh, right? No, we've got to go and do cardio. We've got to do our steps. We've got to hit our macros. We've got to get our workouts in. Silence your little shitty voice, right? Is that, you know, you're going to be stepping on stage or stepping in front of that camera, wearing not very much and tensing everything in your body apart from your face while you try and smile in front of strangers. And I call those the handcuffs, right? They're the thing that in those moments of life asking you questions like, do you want to eat, gives you a reason to be like, no, right? We're getting to that. And then post the show or post the shoot, that handcuff, that deadline, is no longer there. So when life asks you those questions of, dude, do you want to eat? There's no good reason to say no other than, well, I want to stay kind of lean. But it's not as compelling because you're kind of like, well, if I have it this time, that'll get it out of my system. So that'll then it'll be okay. Then it'll be easier to stick to. But one of the problems you're going to have is that the physiology is just completely against you at this point, right? You are a starved and emaciated person, and the only reason you look different to anyone from Auschwitz is because you've got more muscle tissue. And so there's a bunch of physiology in here, right? You have a hormone called leptin that's produced by your fat cells, and leptin is this master regulatory hormone that tells your body how much fuel it has on board. And when the fuel stores are nice and full, it keeps your hunger nice and low. It makes you relatively satiated when you eat a meal. So you're like, oh no, I'm pretty content at the end of that meal. It, you know, makes sure your thyroid hormone doesn't plunge into the toilet. It keeps your sex hormone production at a good place. It does lots and lots of positive things. But it's made in your fat cells, and you've basically depleted all of them. And so leptin isn't going to come back up to normal levels until you regain some body fat. But that's almost like the last thing that someone who's aimed at being lean wants to do, because you just spent months of your life aimed at getting really lean. So clearly that's important to you. And often if it goes well, it becomes a bit of an identity within that. And so suddenly in one day, you're supposed to do a U-turn, and all the things that you've been aiming at for the last several months that guide all the decisions. Should I do this? Should I do that? Should I go for dinner? Can I have that thing? Should I, oh, I'm hungry. I know I need to get my steps in. All of them are being run through the lens of, we're trying to be leaner and to look better on that stage. And then, you know, Saturday comes and goes, and suddenly it's a Sunday or a Monday, And apparently I've now got to walk in the exact opposite direction. And that starts to feel quite like, because here's, maybe I'll make this the last point of this, otherwise I'm going to be waffling on these things for a little bit, but hopefully we're with me so far. One of the things I think it's useful to think about is what emotions are for, right? They're an evolved physical sensation of some kind, and they're there as a feedback mechanism, basically. All the positive ones make you want to do something again, and all the negative ones make you want to run away from them and not do that thing again. That's kind of the point of them, right? We're somewhat rational creatures, but we've got like a small rational brain built on just a giant elephant of emotion and irrationality that is built to allow us to survive. So, you don't think about food just from a rational perspective. It bubbles up inside you and you have this drive to eat. And so these sensations kick in and we make sense of them. We go, ooh, apparently I want to eat. And we have drives for, water and shelter and physical affection and companionship and meaning. And we have all these drives. And they all bubble up inside of us at different times. And then our rational brain goes, oh, it's time to eat, right? Or these other little bits. It comes into our consciousness, but they're all at play. And the emotions are sort of feeding back on them. So you could think of maybe if you value being really, really lean, then when you move towards it, or you see yourself moving towards the leaner physique that you value, that you think is, yes, that's the fucking one. Grace and Jade are going to look phenomenal. People are going to adore me, right? When you see yourself move towards that idealized version of yourself that you've got somewhere in your brain, you get this positive sensation. And so, whether that's seeing the change in the photos or in the gym, ooh, little dopamine hit. Or you get on the scale and the scale goes down, ooh, dopamine hit, right? And yeah, so here's a little thought experiment on the scale that we could jump off on very, very quickly, is that it's not what the scale does, it's what it does in relationship to what we want it to do that matters to our response. Because if we took, Grace's partner, Ross, and Ross is trying to get mega jacked, right? If Ross gets on the scale and it goes down, he's going to be like, oh, right? But if Grace got on the scale, she's like, and it goes down, she's like, fuck yes, right? And if it goes up, Ross is going to be like, yes. And Grace is going to be like, oh no, right? So it's what is this thing doing in relationship to the thing that we value and want? And if it goes in the right direction, good feelings. If it goes in the wrong direction, sort of negative feelings, right? So you've been spending all this time aiming at getting lean, and now you have to turn around and walk the opposite direction. And so now the scale starts ticking up, but you still value being lean because you can't just tell yourself to not value that. That's not how you work. That's about as successful as deciding to be gay or straight. Like, like you might, like, it's not that you can't just tell yourself to value something else within that thing. And I keep saying the last bit and then I keep thinking of extra little bit. So I apologize for this.
No, I'm loving this. Keep going.
One of the things with that emotional feedback, and even the word emotion, what comes from the Latin word mot, which means to move. Emotions move you, emotion, right? Motion moves you towards something. So you need these little values, and most of them are unconscious, and God only knows how much we can kind of shape them anyway. But the amount of emotion we experience in response to positive and negative stuff is annoyingly not equal. So when you get something good, great, that feels lovely, but the equivalent amount of negative tends to feel worse. We call this a negativity bias in psychology. There's a couple of guys called Kahneman and Tversky who, if you ever want to Google negativity bias and look at this stuff, you can check out Kahneman and Tversky. And they came up with about a 2-to-1 ratio. So, let's use weight because it seems like an apt one for us. They usually use money in this particular instance, but the same principles are at play. If you lose 5 pounds, and again, you're trying to lose 5 pounds, we're not Ross who's trying to gain it, let's say, right? You lose 5 pounds, that feels nice. Right? You get some, okay, cool, I'm moving in the right direction. Everything is going well. But it doesn't feel as nice as the gaining 5 pounds feels bad, right? And it seems like there's almost like a 2-to-1 ratio with these things. That will vary person to person. Don't take it as a hard and fast rule. Well, Paul, I only felt 1.7 times. So it's like, it doesn't matter, right? You get the general gist that when we move away, it tends to feel worse, even if it was the equivalent sized step. So then, okay, it was feeling good to be moving towards. Now we're having to turn around and go in the opposite direction. And it's feeling even worse than the positive bit did as we did that, which almost makes us want to abandon it. But then, we don't have the deadline. We don't have the handcuffs that are keeping us on the straight and narrow because the show has passed. Our physiology is against us and isn't going to change until we regain some body fat. And so you're stuck in this shit show of a place that's in between two things. And for me, that's kind of the coalescence of everything that leads to the almost inevitable problem that we're left with.
I'm sure a lot of people listening to this can completely relate. And a lot of people I know are post show at the moment now and are dealing with those kind of feelings, and maybe they don't understand why. And something that's really, really common when like bikini competitors come out of show is like, they're so ready to gain weight. They're like, yeah, I cannot wait to do this. And I guess it's easier said than done, and we can understand. But what I suppose would be your biggest tools that you use with people to help them shift that focus and find the values in the opposite direction again? And like you said, find that identity and get back even to their pre-competition self, where they didn't value, I suppose, that lean body as much.
Yeah. So the first thing to say is that it's hard, right? So, we can talk about this and it can sound very easy because they're just words coming out of my mouth. And I'm always reminded of a great strength coach called Dan John, has a wonderful line that applies to so many things. I said it was simple, not easy, right? So what we're going to describe in so many senses is pretty simple, because we're going to talk about, well, how do you value other things than just your physique, right? Is going to be one of these most important ones. So some of the stuff that you can do in an ideal world is have more values than just what you look like, even before you start a prep. Might be an ideal kind of world, right? But if you don't have that yet, then that's where you are. And so let's figure out how we move forwards from there. So one of the things I like to do with people in this type of thing is get them to write down all the shit that they say matters to them in their life. And I'm pretty sure I did this with you, Grace, back maybe like last year's one, I think. And so people are humans, so they write the same types of things most of the time, right? It's like my family, my friends, my dog, George, even if they don't have a dog called George, like traveling and my physique and whatever those things happen to be kind of for you, right? So for me, I like playing bass. I like reading history. I like obviously working out. I like educating people. I like coaching. I like spending time with friends. I like sport. I have quite a few of these things. And I think that's actually been super helpful for myself. So you write these things down and you come up with your list and you go, okay, does that sound about right? They're the things that you care about? Sweet. And then you're going to draw a big circle and you're going to divide this circle up into how much time do you currently spend within your life attending to each of those values? It doesn't have to be a perfect pie chart here. You don't need to be like, well, it's 23% and that one's 17. You're just trying to get a broad view. And I use the word attending very specifically because you can do physically and you can think. And those aren't quite the same things, but they come under the umbrella of attending to, because you could be physically doing something and your brain could be completely somewhere else, in which case I wouldn't really say that you were attending to the thing at hand. Like, I was with my family. I'm like, yeah, but you weren't. Right? I was at the meal with friends and family. I'm like, yes, your body was there, your mind was not. And so your experience of that was not quite what it could be under the different circumstances. So I use the word attending specifically. And so they divvy it up. And, usually what you find in the post-prep period, or someone who's starting to struggle with disordered eating disordery type things here, is that the vast chunk of their existence is spent thinking about the way that they look, body image stuff. So, I'd include thinking about training, thinking about food, thinking about the way they look. Any of those they're fundamentally the same thing for this person. And so that might be 70, 80% of their time. And then, 5% is spent on this and 15, and who knows, right? And almost universally, when someone looks at that, they go, shit. Because you then ask them, well, is that what you want it to look like? Because who am I to tell you what your life should look like? This is your life. You're an adult, right? It's any type of therapeutic relationship is not about telling you what you have to do or should do, because that's advice and people never listen to advice, right? So it's a space for you to explore and to come up with stuff and to bounce ideas around and to explore your feelings and thoughts and all that type of shit. And so after you've made that one, you then make another big circle and you go, right, make the one that you'd like it to look like, right? So how much would you like to spend? Because the answer for almost all of us is not 0% spent thinking about the way that I look and training and all that kind of stuff. But, maybe I don't want it to be 70% of my waking existence, right? And so, okay, we've given ourselves where we are and we've given ourselves a bit of a target. And we've laid out the things that this person would like to value and attend to by their own description. And sometimes, by the way, you will find people who are like, I actually don't have many things. And that saddens them. And it is hard. And then you get to play a game of trying to make hobbies as an adult. and I'd love to say that that's really easy to do, but it's not, right? So you then just have to be a bit of trial and error and going like, Well, if you don't know what, one of the things you can say is if you don't know where to start, try something, bloody anything. Because even if you go a couple of times and go, yeah, that's not for me, cool, then you've narrowed it down. That wasn't the one. I've never met a human where there's not something in there. And the other best piece of advice I have for that little bit, if you don't know where to start, is what did you like as a kid? Right? Exploring what you liked as a child is it's a rare person who really liked a subject as a 7-year-old, because no one knows why 7-year-olds are into the shit they're into, but they are, right? That isn't sort of still into some of those things as an adult. So you can explore that as a little place to play with. And then, so we've got these values, we've got where we want to aim at, and then it's kind of a case of starting to try and do some of those things, right? We've given ourselves a framework. But we're going to have often a problem with, okay, we've decided to go and do these and change this, and that's all well and good. But as we just said, I could be trying to do something and my brain could be completely elsewhere. So just because I've started to do that, well, what do I do with my thoughts that are going to jump into your head and be like, Grace, Jade, why in the fuck are we trying to gain weight? You look like a small hippo already. I am embarrassed to go out. Put on all the baggy clothes, right? No one can see us. Let's do cardio, right? All those thoughts are going to start jumping out at you. And if you're not careful, you can really like end up just in a world of those, right? And then you're just not present. You're just thinking about those things. Unsurprisingly, they're upsetting. Often, if you give into them, they make you go and do some of the cardio, right? This is where we get into some of the truly eating disordery type territory, is because we start fighting a bunch of stuff. We're terrified of weight gain. And so, okay, well, I'll compensate tomorrow. So I overate because, I didn't say I was going to eat that pizza, but I ate the pizza because Jade came around and then we had wine. Why did I have to order the Domino's? Right? I said I was just going to have a slice. I ate the entire pizza and then I made us order more. And I kept saying, well, tomorrow I'm going to fix it. Right. So tomorrow I'm gonna lower my calories. I'm gonna do an hour's worth of cardio, etc. Right. And these people really mean that in that moment. It's like, fuck, right? There's a panic. And so, but then the compensation, well, if you were hungry enough that you engaged in all those behaviors because your physiology is against you, you don't have the handcuffs anymore, that even at that point, you overate and started to get into the realm of what we might be calling a binge. And we'll talk more specifically probably about definitions in a bit. And so then when we compensate harder, well, your body's got these systems that recognize you're starving more, right? So hunger gets worse, lethargy gets worse. And those impulses to behave like we just did yesterday grow. And maybe you can fight them for a day, maybe 2 days, maybe 3 days. But at some point, often people start caving and then they feel embarrassed about that because fuck, I'm the bikini person, I'm the physique person, I'm not supposed to lose control around food, I'm about the willpower, man, right? I've been telling people for months, you just got to want it, right? And fuck, so they're embarrassed and so they don't want to kind of admit to that. And so all right, they try harder, they sort of double down on those efforts, but it's starting to take up more of their headspace. It's starting to feel harder and harder to stick to these particular things, and those overeats are starting to get a little bit more frequent. Right. And the panic is growing and growing and growing. And this is at the point that people now start kind of thinking about, well, what if I made myself sick? Right. Maybe that's a way of getting rid of some of those calories. And what if I took a laxative? Like, these are those things. And that's where this shit starts often, right? Because it is a way in the very short term of getting rid of some of those calories. It's not as effective as people make out, right? And the amount that purging removes from the calories varies on how much you purged, what you ate before, how long a gap there was, how committed you are, you could kind of call it. Like, how long can you stomach your fingers down your throat for, right? So the amount that the calories that come back up can vary from 20% of them to 50% to maybe a little bit more. And you could say, well, therefore it's not good. But if someone's really committed and they're terrified of weight gain, it's all about keeping that down. Well, even if the purge wasn't as effective as it could be, it's still better than not purging. So, the argument, I think, to those people shouldn't necessarily be, it's not as effective as you think, right? It's more, no. If you go down this path, it will fuck your life up so much worse than you think that it will. And it becomes really easy to start justifying to yourself. There's a bigger gap sometimes between 0 and 1 and all the things that come after it. So the first time, and here's the fucked up thing for someone who makes themselves sick in this situation, they generally feel relieved. They don't feel bad, right? And it might be a bit, they might get this conflict of like, fuck, do I feel better because I just made myself sick? Fuck, I probably shouldn't have made myself sick. But actually I feel better because it worked. And why did it work? Because we still have this value of being really lean. And we just did something we think keeps us lean. So it feels good, And we're like, oh, the panic has settled. So as far as our brain goes, that gets noted as a successful behavior. And in the short term, if all those things are true, it is a successful behavior. The problem is we're using a really fucked up framework for success.
Yeah.
And so we want to start kind of shifting that and going like, look, yes, short term, that might be helpful, but long term, it's really, really not. And tends to, people end up binging and purging more and more frequently. So often they'll, oh, it's just this one time. And then it becomes a second time. And the gap between the first and the second is bigger than between the second and the third. And then the third and the fourth get shorter, and the fourth and the fifth get shorter. And then people are going to the toilet for a bit longer, and they're leaving the tap running so that people can't hear what's going on. And they always keep mints in their bag and mouthwash in their bag. And this whole stuff. And they're getting more and more embarrassed and ashamed about what they're doing because they're not that person, right? But now they're having to face up to, fuck, I am. And how do I get out of this? And sometimes they're gaining weight at this point, which is freaking them the fuck out even more. And so it's a really horrible and hard world. And if any of this resonates with anyone listening, like, you're really not alone in it. There are so many people doing this. And, you know, please do reach out or speak, because it's such a shame for it to go that way. And again, it doesn't have to go that way.
Yeah.
I have no idea what I was saying before I got down that path, so I don't really know.
That's okay. No, we moved. No, we want to move on to this area, because I feel like people need to know that the difference between the two, and you touched on it really, really well, is what is kind of a normal post-show experience when it comes to your hormones, your choices with food, and what isn't. And a lot of the time, it's the length of time at which you're kind of dealing with it as well.
Yep.
Sorry, Grace, I think to add to that as well, what's quite scary for me as an athlete is listening to quite a lot of the things that you said there, Paul, and really connecting with a lot of those feelings, even if they're sort of in an acute period, as opposed to it being progressive and getting more frequent or getting worse, is that a lot of that I could really resonate with it throughout all of my post-show period. So I think, like Grace said, differentiating between what would be a reasonable reaction within that post-show period, the way that your physiology is changing, the way that your mindset's having to shift, as opposed to observing behaviors that are probably getting a little bit too frequent and a little bit dangerous is probably the most appropriate word.
Yeah.
For sure.
I think as well, like when it comes to reversing out, like just to touch on something that I know we wanted to speak about, is like what we're told that we need to do. And you touched on something that I related with, was the cardio element of it, and making sure, you know, even with my reverse right now, I'm like, I need to keep my cardio in every single day. And I'm like, but when does it come a point where I'm like, okay, I need to actually pull back a little bit on my cardio, when I do have this kind of attachment to my cardio at the moment, because I know it's keeping my composition in check for my reverse, and this is what my coach told me to do. Same with my calories, is I know, okay, this 2,000 calories is keeping my body weight, but I don't know when I'm ready to go up to 2.2 or 2.3 or 2.4, and all of these different things, you know, that you're scared to take that next step, I suppose. But where does that kind of line, I suppose, is it drawn, and how do you kind of mentally adjust into that, if I'm making sense?
Yeah, so I think these ones are the ones that have to be personalized, right? When we give blanket recommendations, one person is going to be able to take to that and do it just fine. And another person, it's going to be so aggressive that they freak out, and we actually push them more towards all the shit path we just mentioned. And so this is why it's hard, right? Because it's really, I don't know you, whoever you are who is listening to this particular thing right now. I don't know what goes on in your head specifically. Now, it might sound like, well, Paul just described lots of things that sound like my brain. And I get that. That's because there are some generalities to the way we think about things and what have you. But the specifics of you, I don't know. And that's why the only way you can kind of do that is in a sort of relationship setting. And I don't mean that in like a relationship setting. I mean that in like a coaching setting, just in case anyone thinks, yeah, to work with me, I just have to date you all. That sounds absolutely terrible. That's 100% not what I meant. So you've got to have this ongoing conversation. I think it helps to have both a bird's eye view and a shorter term view. So we've got this idea that, okay, we're coming out, so we're reversing from this thing, and we're presumably, because we're bodybuilding or, you know, physique athletes, trying to grow our physique over time. And so we're going to be moving into a phase where we're trying to undo the negative effects of the prep itself, put us into a nice position for them to start growing some muscle tissue for the next season that we go through, whether that's next year or the year after, depending on how long you take a gap, or even a couple of years, whatever, right? So we know that that's what we've got to move towards, but like at what speed and how aggressively is the bit that we're then curious about. So, okay, we've got this idea. Okay, Grace is doing lots of cardio currently, and perhaps longer term, in order to gain muscle, we actually want to pull that back a little bit, and over time do less. Right. And we might not take it to zero because there's benefits to doing cardio throughout the whole kind of thing. But maybe it doesn't need to be an hour a day, 6 times a week type thing, right? As well as on top of the training and all the steps. And you're like, I have a part-time job of 20 hours of activity a week, and I'm supposed to have a job. And this, hang on, this is just as intense as my prep was. What the fuck am I doing? Right. Like, one of the points of an off season is it shouldn't be quite as intense. You can't drive a car with your foot flat to the floor the whole time, because at some point there's a corner and you have to turn, and good luck doing that with your foot jammed straight to the floor. Like, prep is a time to accelerate to some degree, and you can't do that if you've already got it jammed flat to the floor, right? So part of this is undoing some of the neuroses, repairing some of the physiology, repairing some of the psychology, and I would call that sort of, previously you've got this narrow focus, you're trying to open it up a little bit kind of through there. So within that, then we're like, okay, we want to gradually reduce Grace's cardio, but we've got some options for layering this in. Like, okay, how much are you doing at the moment?
30 minutes a day.
Yeah, every day?
Every day, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And
as set out by Cal, and I suppose that's what I want to touch on, is how maybe your coach is kind of encouraging to do things as well to control the reverse and to control the body weight gain,
Yeah. So how much were you doing before?
90 minutes.
Okay. So it's come back quite a bit from where that is. And so, with doing that, and then, calories have gone up, and me and Grace had a conversation, and she probably tried to keep them a bit lower than was ideal. And then, in fact, she spoke about it on Instagram. I'm saying nothing that she hasn't already put everywhere, right? So, and then bump them up kind of from there. And maybe she's pulling her steps down a little bit. And maybe the next bit is going right. And at each point along the way, Grace is just settling into this experience and going, okay, the terrifying things aren't happening. I can cope with this level of discomfort. Whereas if we took it all the way, immediately, all at once, she might psychologically implode and it might be a bit too much. So those are those bits of going, all right, we know where we're trying to aim towards, but where are you now? And okay, those sound like sensible adjustments. And how are you feeling and how are you doing? And okay, well, how about if we pull it back to 5 days a week as the next thing? Does that feel okay? Yeah. Okay. All right, cool. Right. Or maybe we make it 20 minutes. You've got plenty of options within there, as long as they're moving in the right direction and the person is feeling okay. And that's why there's no way of saying you should definitely do this at this particular moment, because that's a coaching relationship issue and an understanding, not just the physiology of your person, but the psychology of your person too.
Yeah. I think that's probably one of the things that I struggle with most this time around, because whilst the implementation, so the plan, was very much in place, and that was fantastic. Everybody knew what they were doing, great. And then life, like you say, sometimes you have a corner, and I hit about 3 corners all in one go, and that entire plan just fell to the floor. Like, there was nothing left of it. And I think from an identity point of view, and I know myself and Grace have spoken about it, and you've touched on it here, is like, you identify so much as that person that has had their foot solidly to the floor for 6 months, potentially even longer. So to lose that control, I suppose, control might be the right word, to lose that control is just, it can be so damaging. I know personally, from a personal experience, it's been hell. Best way to describe it. But I suppose we touched on, Grace, we spoke about that as well in terms of external pressures. Do you think that there are, specifically in bikini, any external pressures? Social media, you're smiling.
This feels like a leading question.
I feel like there's a lot of conflicting information out there, and even the listeners, I'm sure they've heard numerous different things about what is right, what is wrong, from coaches, other competitors. Like, it's plastered all over social media, specifically about what bikini competitors need to do, because it's all well and good, like you said, for bodybuilders, like, they just need to get big. That is what they're going for. But bikini competitors, it's like the idea that we need to stay smaller, we need to stay conditioned, and then some people are like, no, you really need to grow, you need to get absolutely massive. And there's all of these different ideas about what is right and wrong. So I suppose, have you heard of anything, and what are your thoughts on those comments?
Yeah, I mean, you see lots of it, and I think, look, if we're being brutally honest, I think females have a harder time generally than guys with this, and I think one of the main reasons for that is that for guys, you can be considered guy-y by being massive and a bit chunky, right? But still like a jack dude, just fucking powerlifter guy over here, and also shredded, and like both of those still come under the umbrella of masculine. Under the umbrella of the more feminine, it's the harder, like the lean bit kind of looks a bit that way for most females. They're like, yeah, that's the kind of look. But embracing the chunkier size, right? If you wanted to use a nicer language for it, the curvier side, right? And that will kind of matter if you're ever talking to these people. Definitely use curvier rather than chunkier, even though I just said that. So ignore the mistake I just made, right? Or
I like being called chunky. I like chunky.
Yeah, exactly, right? But that's, I think, generally speaking, harder to accept. And so there's a narrower band of what females want themselves to look like that's harder within there. And I think I'm reminded probably actually of I think me and Grace had a conversation once where I called it bodybuilding versus body revealing, and which one do you really like? And guys often do really like bodybuilding, right? They kind of like sometimes both phases. Sometimes they actually don't like the diety bit as much. That's almost universally never true for the female categories as much, right? Where it's like, no, I love the body revealing bit, and all the attention and all the lovely stuff that comes in with that. And often that's, one of the things that I see pretty commonly is people who haven't traditionally felt that attractive can find a way of suddenly feeling more attractive and suddenly like getting a bunch of reinforcement that they didn't get usually in their teenage years or their early teenage years. And they find, okay, well, I couldn't do anything, this was true for myself, by the way. Like I was a slightly chunky teenager with acne, right? And I was like, well, I can't seem to do anything about my face, and this acne thing just won't piss off. So I could at least do something about my body. And it worked. Like I suddenly got more attention. That wasn't coincidental. And that was a lesson that I learned and embodied, right? And you couldn't just tell me it wasn't true because my experience told me otherwise. And I think one of the types of people that are often drawn more towards this and struggle is this becomes, all of us want to feel attractive. Name me a person who doesn't, and I'll call you a liar, right? Like now there varies in how important that is to us, but we want to, even if it's just to our partner or one other, whatever, like no, or flip it and go, well, do you want to feel ugly? And you'd be like, well, no one wants that bit, right? So even if you're not that bothered about being particularly attractive, at least you don't want to be ugly, right? And so this matters to us, and we're a sexually selective species. How on earth would it not matter to you? And so when we start doing something and we get rewarded for it and people say nice things and we start to kind of look at it and we like the way we look a little bit more, right? Because we liked it on other people too. That becomes quite intoxicating. And the biggest danger, one of the big, maybe not the biggest, because God only knows what the biggest one is, but that is we double down on that so hard that we forget to cultivate other parts of ourselves. Because that was so like, oh, this thing that I've been missing out on for so long. Like it was like this hole in me that just felt like I wasn't enough because I wasn't attractive, and suddenly I am. And now you're telling me I have to let go of all that? I'm like, no, you don't have to let go of all of that, but I'd like you. And God, if you put it into the element of going, well, what do you want written on your tombstone? Like most people don't go, great set of abs and a phenomenal ass. Like, yeah, maybe that can be a subheading, right? But most of us want to be more than that. And we only have to ask ourselves, what do you value in the people you care about? And I'm not going to say that you don't care about the way people look who are with you if they're your partner, for example. I'm not particularly two-phased what my mum looks like, for example, right? Unless this would get super squirrely and questionable, right? But we care about what certain people within our lives look like. But for the other than that bit, right? And which really all we're saying is, do I still find them fuckable? And if the answer to that is yes, then gravy, right? Then the rest is just variance and is fine. The other stuff that we care about, and the reason you should care more about yourself than just the physical, is because you care more about the physical in all of the people that you love and adore spending time with. And don't forget that will be true of you too. And so let's try and kind of cultivate that stuff. But I think, what do we have? This started with a question on social media, I think, did it?
Yeah. With the question, I suppose it ties in back to that with regards to, I suppose, your family and stuff, and trying to live up to their expectations. And like you said, going back to that wheel post show and trying to reinstill those values and get the identity back. But take someone like Jaden and myself, for example, who are, you know, higher level bikini competitors, and we do have aspirations within the sport, and we're trying to balance, I suppose, the expectations that they have on us, but also try to live up to our expectations as an athlete that we know that we can live up to. So how, I suppose, because it's easier if you're kind of like stepping away from competing and that's that, but there's also an element, and I struggle with it, is trying to find that balance between, okay, no, I need to be the Grace that attends to her family and goes out in social occasions, but I also want to be this athlete Grace that I really want to improve this year, and I do want to have that athlete mindset, you know, and that pro level mindset. How do you, how would you say you can manage the two for people who are more higher level up, I suppose, within the competing realms?
Yeah. So it comes back to, this is a skill and it takes practice and it varies over time. And I actually think you can learn a lot of this stuff as well, not just from the bodybuilding world, but from other athletic endeavors as well. And generally what you see within almost anything is an obsessive period followed by a more reasonable period where someone has learned to manage the switch. And I prefer kind of thinking of it as a dimmer switch rather than a just completely on or off, because actually on or off is half of the problem with many of these things. So it's more, can we dial it up? Can we dial it back a little bit? And so you could think that prep's dialed up to 10, right? If you're a Spinal Tap fan, it's gone up to 11. But we've ramped it up as far as this dimmer switch will go. I've just aged myself with that reference, by the way. Right? So we'll turn this guy to 10. Well, when you come into the off season, we don't want to dim it to 0. But it can't, we've recognized we can't keep it at 10, right? And anyone who's been through an off season will recognize you can't keep it at 10 and you need to attend to some of these other things. Otherwise, you're going to have a very lonely existence because you'll turn into the most selfish asshole that has ever lived and everyone will abandon you, and they should, right? Because
there is people that do it. There is people that do it.
No, you're entirely correct, sadly. But I think it catches up with those people at some point, right? So, you know, it's okay, we're dialing it back, but what does that then look like? It's kind of easy to define success to some degree when you're dialed up to 10, because the barometer of success is one domain specific. So I tick the boxes for this domain. The other shit doesn't really matter, right? So it's like, tick the box of my steps. I tick the box of my macros or my meal plan, depending on kind of what I'm doing. I tick the boxes of my training. I tick the boxes of my cardio. I check in with my coach. We make whatever tweaks we need to make, onwards, onwards, onwards. And it's so successfully doing that is very clear. You check in each week and you're like, well, did you do it? And they're like, and yes. And did it? Well, have we seen any changes? Yes. Cool. Keep going. No. Sweet. We need to make some tweaks. It's super clear, right? Okay, when you move out of that and you dim the switch back from 10 to 7, 6, something in that kind of region, what you're really saying is there's room to turn up the lights in other areas. But that redefines success, because success now is not just about training and nothing else. It's about, okay, yes, training and making sure I'm improving on what we're doing, but also, am I attending now to these other domains in my life? And so one of the tasks for people with this stuff is literally asking that, like, what does a successful week or day or month start to look like for you in terms of the right balance of all of these things? You're spinning more plates now, you're juggling more stuff, and you're trying to keep them all going. This can often, to people who've been used to 10, feel like they're not doing enough. But that's because, again, they're using the old lens to evaluate.
Yes.
Going, only one domain matters, and we're going, no.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. That's something I'm still struggling with. You know, is there's that lens? You know, and I'm sure a lot of people are the same.
Yeah. Again, we come back to, I said it was simple, not easy, right? One of the things you're trying to figure out with this stuff is going, okay, I can see what he's saying. That makes sense, and I've bought into the concept. Because once you've kind of bought into the concept, you can kind of keep going with it until it starts to feel a bit more natural to you. And that's what I mean by the skill aspect of this, that people, after they've done it multiple times, know how to dial it back, know how to ramp it up, know how to adjust those particular kind of bits and pieces. But when you're first doing it, you're like, is this right? Right? You haven't successfully done it to know that it's working yet, because there's like a lag time on success, right? Like, weight loss is a great example of it. You have to spend a good few weeks doing the damn thing before you notice the effects of all those days that you just spent doing. It doesn't happen immediately. So when people are first starting out, there's the trusting the process bit, because they haven't got the experience that tells them this does work. They've just got words that other people have said. And when you're learning this new skill of figuring out the balance, you're just hearing words that I've said. You don't have the experiential knowledge yet of successfully doing that to know that you can trust it yet. And again, that's why sometimes having a space to talk to someone and just bounce these things off and make sure you're okay and all that stuff is super valuable. It's not because it's like, oh my God, he changed my entire world. And it's like what he said there has changed everything. It's like, it's rarely that. It's usually a space to figure those bits and pieces out. So I don't know if that helps as a bunch of
Yeah,
ideas.
no, it does. It does, absolutely. I think like when you're so used to on prep doing so much, when you even just do a small bit less than that, you just don't feel like you're doing enough. Or maybe you think that you're lazy or you're unproductive, and there's all these things, and you do want to do more because that's what you were ingrained to do for so long. So it's like, why would I only do 2 cardio sessions a week? Do you know, that kind of way? And it's very, very hard, but it does, in time, it does get easier.
Here's one thing I actually quite like saying to people with that type of thing, and it's being deliberately facetious. And that's going, okay, so Grace was doing 90 minutes a day, and you just level them up, whatever they're saying. Only 90 minutes? Why weren't you doing 2 hours? And if they're doing 2 hours, why aren't you doing 3 hours, 5 hours? How much more you got, right? Like at some point they start to go, oh yeah. Because people have this idea of all or nothing, and it's always bollocks. Like I don't care what you're doing. You're not doing all of it all of the time. Like you sleep and take a shit sometimes and do some other stuff. So, well, that's not enough, right? You need to push harder. No shitting for you. Let's just keep going, right? Like, so, I think one of the things you can play with that is deliberately kind of make fun of it in a nice way to go, oh yeah, it's a fair point.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think going back to the on and off switch as well, I know we spoke about it, Grace, the on and off switch in my first prep especially, so I don't suspect that anybody has had a different experience unless you have friends and family that have grown up in this bodybuilding space and they all get it. But that on and off switch, I found it extremely difficult in the first instance, in the first post-show prep, because I think there's an expectation of your friends and family, and it's not a sort of incorrect expectation as such, but it just stopped. It just stopped. Like, you've done your prep, everything's done, you got on stage, you were stand up 5 times over the course of 24 hours, spark with the bikini, big trophy, wonderful day, let's eat. And I really struggled, obviously, in that first prep. I didn't necessarily have the guidance that I have now, the space and the experience that I have now. And it's quite difficult, again, whilst you're trying to establish what feels good and what feels comfortable for you, whilst you have that sort of external expectation of people just to think, right, okay, you're done. That's it, like back to normal, or normal in air quotes. So is there anything that you could offer guidance-wise for a specifically first-time bikini athletes in general, for dealing with that?
So for managing the friends' expectations post-show, that type of thing?
Yeah, definitely.
So, yeah, I mean, we're sort of back at the thing we said earlier of going, the first time you go through it, it's just hard in general because you're about to go into a bunch of unknowns. Like the whole prep is an unknown. Getting tanned when, why is everyone else naked? And I'm like, oh, okay, we're just all naked together and wearing a small paper thong. Okay, great. Right. Or if you're the guys, you've got your cock stuffed into the world's smallest ankle sock and you're just trying to look everyone in the eyes while everyone's nearby being sprayed. You're like, this is normal. Okay. Apparently this is normal. We'll just act like this is normal. And you're going through all these experiences that they're definitely, by the way, not normal, right? But that's what you're doing. So that's kind of what you do. And you, okay. And then you get into this back end and there's a bunch of unknowns. And so they're unknown to you. They're also unknown to your family and friends. And you're right in kind of them going, they probably think it ends with that bit, which is presumptive of them because you probably wouldn't have aimed at all this stuff again if you didn't value being reasonably lean more frequently than just once. That's just about that day. And then the day afterwards, I don't care anymore. It's like, that's not going to happen. So, as with most things, I think the key to a lot of stuff is communication and just try, like, sit down and have a conversation with them or kind of mention it. I will also say, I don't know that I've ever known anyone first time in this stuff do that or do it successfully. But if you were going to, when someone was thinking about this, it would really be wise to have a conversation kind of with them and be like, look, I'm going to be managing this stuff on the back end. I'm not sure what it's kind of going to be like yet. I'm probably going to be a bit up and down, I'm told, but I don't know. And start to figure that out. Go for it.
Do you know, just because it reminded me of a scenario actually with a client coming out of a photo shoot prep, and I suppose I know a lot of people, is it's the guilt element of it, is knowing that, okay, I do want to, okay, maybe I want to go with my friends on a Saturday night, but I love waking up in the morning on a Sunday morning and getting my cardio in and doing a walk and feeling fresh. But you're leaving, I suppose, your friends, or you're sitting at the table with your friends and you're thinking, I don't know if I really want to be here. I don't know if I want to have a drink or all that kind of thing. And it's taking you, like we spoke about, it's taking you away from that. And then there's that element of guilt, or you're sitting with your family and you can't enjoy a meal because you'd rather be eating your macro track meal at home. And there's that element of guilt that I know a lot of people deal with, where it's like, okay, I want to do these things, but I feel really, really bad.
Yeah.
Sorry, I want to do these things, but I don't want to do these things. And then that's making me feel really, really bad about both ends.
Yeah. So and we come back to a topic in the ebook, the almost inevitable problem. And one of them is that you have many competing desires and they're often in conflict. And I would say they're arguably even more in conflict at this particular kind of place, where you have a desire and a drive for food, and you have a desire and a drive to spend time with people you care about, right? Everyone does. And they manifest themselves, and I would like to go and do this, or I would like to eat that. But you also have this other important drive to you, which is based on the value of being lean and looking a certain way. And they are inescapably in conflict with one another at this particular moment. And so whichever choice you make, you're going to be left with some negative emotion, because whichever choice you make, you're moving away from one of the things that you want.
Yeah.
And so, if you don't go, you're going to feel a bit guilty because you kind of haven't gone, right? And you probably should feel guilty because you've just spent 6 months not going out with friends and family anyway, right? So, to some degree, one of the things I would encourage most people to start thinking is we're trying to focus less on you. You've spent ages focused on you. Half the problem we've now got is you are too focused on you, right?
I love that.
On you, right?
You need to get less. You need to get less selfish.
Yes, it's exactly
That's
that, right? And that's often, one of the things you try and do is refocus someone's attention onto other things, right? If you've ever practiced mindfulness strategies, this is really all you're doing, is noticing, oh, I'm having a bunch of thoughts about this. Okay, right? Refocus on, insert whatever you're trying to refocus on at that particular point. So if you're out with friends, it's like, oh my God, I'm feeling that, and the thoughts are bubbling up, and I'd rather just be kind of at home. And that's what I mean by you can just get lost in your own little mental world there and not really be present. And some part of your brain's paying attention to what they're saying because you know when to smile and when to nod, but you ain't fucking there, right? And so I just hit my own microphone. I don't know if that made a noise. But then as you go, and that's really throwing me off my train of thought. It's really annoying when you do something like that, right? So, you've got caught up in your own brain space, and you can end up arguing with it and being like, oh, I'm just feeling guilty about this thing. I really don't want to be, fuck me, I feel real guilty about this particular thing. And you can be in there for hours. And the important part is none of that is paying attention to what you were wanting to do, which was attending to being around everyone. So maybe the best analogy or my favorite analogy that I like to use with this one, I call this the toddler, right? And so we've got this idea of you've accidentally built a really annoying toddler inside yourself who's used to getting their own way all of the time. And that toddler is this drive to be lean and to look a certain way and all that stuff. And it dominates your attention. It shapes all of your perceptions about what you see. When people look at food, they don't just see the same thing. We see different things, right? Based on what we're thinking about, what's important to us, etc. So everyone listening to this will see macros and shit, right? But that is not what the rest of the world sees when they see food and all the kind of rest of that stuff. So we see different things. Perception is its own world, and it's an important world to understand at some point. But so when we're engaging in the activity that we're trying to do, this little toddler voice can start jumping out and being like, no, we have to stay really lean. You've got to go and do more cardio, all the things that we've been saying kind of up to this point. But we've now noticed, shit, I have a 2.5-year-old who's an asshole who keeps getting her own way and crying and screaming and dominating my attention and headspace when they don't get their own way, right? And the problem is you haven't noticed that you've been raising a really shitty toddler along the way. So by the time you get to this point and realize, fuck me, that thing takes up a lot of my time and attention, and you've got this difficult next step, which is, okay, we've drawn our pie charts. We've done all that stuff that recognized I want to pay less attention to this voice and more attention to these other parts of myself and these other things that I value. Simple. Not easy. And it's not easy because what happens when you start ignoring a toddler who's used to getting his own way?
It spits its dummy out.
Yeah, that little asshole screams way louder, right? And then so it's actually harder to then you're like, what do you mean you're ignoring me? There. And just starts, those thoughts come faster and faster and louder and louder. And you're just sat there like, this is really fucking hard. This is really hard to focus on what's happening in front of me right now. And so often we lose the battle with the toddler and we end up spiraling kind of back in and spending our time in that internal world. But all that's doing is reinforcing the toddler. It's reinforcing that, nope, this works. I get my own way each and every time. Happy days. And you will continue to raise not just a toddler, but a full adult asshole. And so one of I like the toddler analogy because we can kind of go, oh yeah, that sort of makes sense, right? When we're having these thoughts and going, okay, if we were trying to teach the toddler something differently, generally we're going to ignore that little bastard, right? Like it lives on attention. Like it's used to getting its own way. It gets kind of this. When it doesn't, it's going to start kicking off some more and throwing stuff. But eventually, if we keep ignoring that little shit, it gets a bit quieter. It starts to learn, okay, this doesn't work. And it becomes easier to pay attention to what's actually going on. And then maybe it decreases and is not a really annoying 2-year-old anymore. And he becomes an okay 4-year-old. All right. And then you've built something that like, aha, now we like our toddler. and she's not just a little shit. Right. And so this is kind of all great. So when those thoughts start getting louder and more difficult, and they will when you stop trying to engage with them because they're used to getting their own way, remind yourself of the toddler, right? And then you're trying to refocus on this task at hand. And there's lots of mindfulness strategies you can engage with and learn and practice. Like sometimes people, when they do like yoga-y breathing and mindfulness-y stuff, like they have this perception that they're going to like have an empty mind. There's going to be nothing in there. It's just a blank black space. Nothing exists in here. And then as soon as a thought jumps in, which takes 0.03 seconds, they go, oh, I suck at this, right? But actually, what mindfulness really is the ability to notice yourself having that thought and then let it go and not engage with it, right? You're actually practicing ignoring the toddler at a low level. Right. So nothing's going on. Oh, I'm starting to think about whatever I'm thinking about. And like, oh, that's interesting. All right. Refocus back on the breathing. And now I'm thinking about, Jade said something fucking weird a minute ago. And you're like, okay, that's not thinking about breathing either. Let go of Jade to thinking about whatever. Back to the breathing. And you're just practicing these low level thoughts that are easier to let go of, so that the more you develop this skill, the more you can let go of the big screaming ones. And that doesn't mean you do it every single time successfully, because no one does that, right? You're swinging your bat at this thing way too frequently to have a perfect strike rate. And that's another thought that people then have is like, oh, fuck, I've been engaging with it for 5 minutes. Paul said I wasn't supposed to do that. I'm fucking shit at this. I'm never going to be able to. By the way, that is not letting go of that thought either. That's having a whole other conversation with it. So the point is you just notice it and go, oh, you're doing that. Okay, what am I supposed to do here? Refocus. My friend here is in front of me and telling me about their life. Okay, right, focus. I don't care about their life. I care about macros. No. Okay, refocus on them. No, and you just practice that thing over and over, and you'll fucking laugh at yourself sometimes. Then you get frustrated with yourself. And all those things will happen early on. The more you do it, the more you're reinforcing those pathways, the better you get at it. They're all skills, right? And like any skill, it's about repetition and successful repetition and practice of those bits and pieces. So hopefully that makes
Brilliant.
sense.
No,
Yeah.
I that was so valuable, like really, really was. And I think a lot of people can take something from that. And I'm definitely going to practice it myself because I need to get better at it for sure. But I think kind of coming back to those kind of tools and the mindfulness and stuff like that. And I want to talk a little bit about just the last point is I suppose the self-perception and the body dysmorphia element of it coming out of shows. And I suppose what we spoke about there in the mindfulness and catching those thoughts is related here as well. So what's your kind of experience of dealing with females in particular when it comes to the body image side of things and the constant checking and the mirroring and all the stuff that we were used to on prep, and how do we kind of just remove that, and the clothes and how they feel and stuff like that?
Yeah, and I mean, God, it's the same stuff, really, isn't it? It's difficult, right? You're not going to succeed perfectly at any of all of this stuff, even if you're a seasoned pro at this. You still get it wrong sometimes, because also, by the way, it's normal to feel a bit shit about your body sometimes. Name a person They feel shit about their body sometimes, right? And no one in the, and by the way, imagine if you didn't. What would that mean? That would mean you thought yourself was perfect and you'd be an asshole, right? So like you don't want to be that either. Like you'd be the world's biggest narcissist. So I am there's literally nothing wrong with me. I am flawless. Like you just be an asshole. So I think some of this comes down to the word acceptance, right? Accepting that we're going to have some of these thoughts, that a certain amount of these thoughts are normal. Like success with this doesn't mean decreasing the thoughts to zero, because normal human beings without any issues in this realm whatsoever don't have zero of these thoughts. So if you're expecting success to mean zero, well, then you're expecting yourself to be better than everyone. And that's just dumb, right? That's like expecting yourself to never experience the sensation of hunger. You're like, no, that's part of the human experience. You can't expect that. And so then we have to learn to accept it. And so there's some sensible things that you can start doing within there of being like, right, well, if we know we engage in a bunch of body checking behaviors, maybe we try and go to the mirror less, right? Or we don't go and do our posing session all the time immediately, or we decrease the frequency. Or if we do a posing session, we don't do it in front of the mirror, right? Or maybe we start weighing ourselves less frequently than we were on prep, because we know when we step on the scale, it goes up. We then have a hard time getting out of our head about what that scale means for the next hour. So if you're doing it every day, well, now I've got 7 hours a week, right, that I'm trying to decrease. Where if I do it 3, maybe it's only 3. Although sometimes people then freak out about not seeing the scale and then do their own thing there. So again, personalized, right, within that type of thing. If we've got clothes that are starting to get, a bit tighter, guess what you should do? Buy more clothes, right? And
that's the thing is people are afraid, I think, to buy a new wardrobe.
Yes.
One of the attach themselves to those clothes, that they felt lean in.
Yeah. One of the realities that anyone who does this stuff for a long period of time, you're going to have your lean wardrobe and your non-lean wardrobe, and you need both. And you can just, again, we're going to have to accept that at some point. And I'm not saying it's easy to accept it, but fighting against it is a losing battle. And so the quicker we can kind of go, okay, I don't need to do this thing. So some of them is just sensible removals of shit. And, that's, again, a personalized kind of conversation that you have of being like, which of these thoughts and stuff do you feel that you struggle the most with? Okay. Right. And which ones would you feel okay if we removed? And which ones would you freak the fuck out about at this particular point? Right. And it's no different than, some people feel fine. I'm not going to track 1 meal a week or a day, or it's 1 meal a day I'm not going to track. Or, there's options within that. As long as they're moving towards where we're trying to move someone towards, then they can all make sense. You can't judge any one behavior in isolation for this, because it's about what came before it and what's it moving towards. It's like a step in a ladder. So what might be like, well, that's crazy behavior. These people need to be cutting back and doing way less than you're saying that they should do. You're like, well, you've never worked with people, right? If I'm saying everyone had to do that particular thing at that moment, then you're just never working with people. So you've got those things going on. Then, so some of these strategies are about behaviors, like what are you actually doing? Because what you do influences what you think, and what you think influences what you feel, which then influences what you behave like, where cognitive behavioral therapy is built on this whole idea. And so we can interact at multiple levels. We can try and adjust some of the behaviors we're engaging in so that they lead to less thoughts and less feelings, and then it becomes easier to manage. We can have some strategies that are based around how you think about those things. And some of them are about challenging those thoughts and reframing them in a particular manner. And some of them are about not interacting with the toddler. And we've got to figure out which ones are kind of which. Like, to some degree, people need to be bought into the overarching idea of what you're trying to do before the toddler strategy makes sense. Right? Because until you understand, why am I letting go of this thought? Why would I not be engaging with it? This is really important that I engage in it, because, that voice is powerful and it has a compelling argument that is, life is better when we're leaner. And you need to have something you can say back to that is compelling to you, because otherwise you're just sort of giving these reasons that you're like, I don't mean this. Right? And it's harder to then let go of stuff when you'll be like, it'd be like trying to go and fight a tiger with a foam finger. Like, but it's a sword. I'm like, it's really not. This is a terrible, I should have a sword. Why am I going within this? No, tell yourself it's a sword. It's fucking not a sword, right? Like, you need a compelling thing. I've never used that as an analogy. I have no idea whether that works, right? But you need a compelling thing to say back to it, to go, okay, I understand why I'm engaging in these strategies and why I'm doing these behaviors. And so now I can engage in these particular ones. So you've got multiple layers that you could come in at with this. And it's about, again, having a conversation with the person, figuring out where they're at, which ones make sense to them. And as with anything, trying them and kind of going, well, did it work? If the strategy reduced what you're dealing with in a positive manner, fucking A.
I think that's what we spoke about when we were on the call, is like not thinking about, okay, a month down the line, this is what I need to be doing, but rather just take it day by day.
Yeah.
Assess, speak with your coach. Did it work? Brilliant. Keep going. Did it not work? Okay, adapt, and just take it day by day. That's really what I think is so crucial about the post-show period.
One of the things.
Sorry.
No, go.
No, I think the communication element of it as well, because there's a space that some people occupy. I know I tried to, and it didn't last very long, of sort of protecting yourself. Like I've got a game face on, and I'm not struggling. Nothing's an issue for me. I've got this. We're okay. And having that conversation with yourself when you know, like you said, acknowledging those sort of thoughts and the things that you're dealing with and applying strategies instead of putting a brick wall up and saying no. I don't have that issue. And again, that just for me personally just prolonged the issue for such a long time, not accepting it, trying to pull myself together, be an athlete, be committed. I'm not struggling with this. You're not supposed to struggle with this. And rather than accepting that, yeah, it is actually really fucking quite hard.
Yeah, and that's a hard switch, but it's that's a humility thing. And we've got an odd balance of things. Like we need a combination of arrogance and humility to do well in almost anything, right? You need the arrogance to think, no, I could win this and I could do really well, and fuck yeah. But you also need to be humble enough to not be a complete dickhead, right? Because if you were infinitely humble, well, you'd probably never go and do anything or push anything because you're like, oh, I'm meek and it's okay, right? Like you need a combination of both of these things and knowing when and which ones apply at that particular kind of moment in time. Is what you start to respond. I had a thought and I've entirely forgotten what that thought was.
That's my fault.
What was Grace? Oh yeah. No, it was about that actually. And I think Jade, you sort of said it earlier, like you had this plan, and Grace had the same thing laid out years in advance, right?
Oh, it was planned like when I was about 5 weeks out. Like I hadn't even finished my show, and I was like, that's what I'm gonna do.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, that's a perfectly good thing to do. We've been talking about the importance of preparing a little bit ahead of time for where you're going. The mistake is, and it's the mistake of so many things, and it's the mistake of rigidity, of thinking that no, the plan cannot be adjusted. And Mike Tyson once said that everybody got a plan until they get punched in the face, right? And it's your ability to adapt to a changing environment and go, okay, well, which bits of this plan now apply and now work, and which bits need to be adjusted? And your ability to do that pretty rapidly, that is a hallmark of success in, you could probably argue, in really any field, whether you're running a business thing, whether prep is like that all the time. Like you're adjusting each week things. You're not always adjusting things each week, but you're going in with that idea of this is the plan currently, and we're looking for markers for when it's working and when it's not. And when we see this, we tweak one of these few things. Okay, off we go, right? And we have conversations maybe with our clients as to, right, we're at this marker. You could take these 3 roads ahead of us. We've got this one, and this one as options. Which one do we think is best right now? Sometimes all of them are fine. Sometimes I think this one's going to be best, but I still want your opinion on it because you know your life better than me and you're figuring that kind of stuff out. The same thing is true here, right? Of going like, right, these are the sensible things to be doing. I know I need to reverse. I know I'm going to need to bump my calories up. I'm going to need to pull my cardio down and blah, 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 blah. But often people think just about the physiology side of it, and they fail to put in that you're a human on top of that particular thing. And you're like, no, I'm not. I'm a bikini athlete. And that apparently means I'm Rambo, right? And you're like, well, no, you got feelings and stuff in there too. And that's okay, right? So it's that ability to adjust and go, is it working? Yeah, cool. Keep going. No, okay, that one little bit isn't. All right, what do we think? And some of that comes down to having some of the skills and understanding of psych stuff to know, just like you would with physiology shit, to know, well, okay, we're in this boat, right? What are the murky waters ahead of us where if we turn left here, we're going down a shitty path? Like, okay, maybe I shouldn't do more cardio and start compensating in this period because I know where that road leads. And okay, well, but if I turn right and take this road, well, that still leads to its own bunch of shit. And my brain's going to have to accept fucking gaining body fat and this, that, and the other. Like, that sucks too. I'm like, yeah, it does. But it's a better path still than the other one. Because the other one, at some point, you're going to gain body fat too. And it's going to feel even more distressing than if you did it this way. So it's figuring those things out.
Yeah. Something that Carl said to me that gave me kind of peace of mind, even with my reverse, is you can never predict how you're going to respond. Even no matter how many preps that you do, you just cannot predict in that moment, for whatever reason, why you make the decisions the way you do.
Yep.
You know, some years you might eat a little bit more, some years you might be a little bit too restrictive, and you know, you can just never predict, and you can't beat yourself up if it's not how you expected it to be. And in fact, you know, there is a perfect post show for everybody. My perfect is not your perfect, and Jay's perfect is not mine, and all that kind of thing. And you can never predict or say that this is going to work for me as well. And just not beat yourself up, I think, is the biggest thing if you didn't follow your post plan to a T, because there is a perfect one for you out there, if that makes sense.
Here's another one though, right? Let's say you have a perfect one this time, and then next time you don't have a perfect one. Guess what people also then do? Oh, why I was perfect last time. Why am I being shit this time? It's like, look, you aren't the same in 2 years' time as you are now, and nor is your environment, right? And all the things going on. So just because you had a successful one, like last time, it's sensible to then go, okay, those strategies worked. Cool. Well, we should probably start with those as a baseline because that seemed like it worked last time. Let's try and repeat that. But if things go a little differently, you got dumped, that person died, your knee fucking broke, right? Like whatever, all those things happen in life. And that means that the strategies that previously worked aren't always completely guaranteed to work next time. If you start beating yourself up for that, you're again not learning the lesson of going, no, what is actually happening and how do I respond to it? Not what I wished was happening isn't happening. You're like, well, that's irrelevant. You're just daydreaming and wishing again, and not much good comes from that stuff. Address reality, act accordingly, and you'll be fine.
Yes. I think that's definitely the biggest take home for me anyway, is that, because that's what I struggle with, is the beating myself up that it wasn't perfect, you know. And I know, Jade, you were the same as well.
Yeah, it's the plan versus the expectation of the plan. I think if you focus more on the plan that can move, that can be adjusted, it is tangible, it's not going to be fixed, as opposed to your expectation is probably way more rigid than the plan is ever going to be. So, I mean, you're talking human nature, aren't you? You have an expectation of most things. So it's removing, or at least trying to remove that edge, and that ultimately the pressure will lift if you remove that expectation on yourself. Again, the theme throughout the entire podcast is easier said than done, but it's something I really struggle with and easier to focus on not doing.
There's a good line from Seneca, who's an old Roman writer and known as a little bit of a Stoic, but he said, we suffer more in imagination than reality. And so many of the things that we beat ourselves up from, it's just shit going on in your head more than mostly what other people are thinking. Half the expectations you think other people have, they don't care about, right? You're just projecting that you think that it matters a lot to them. And no, you know, I'm not saying it doesn't matter.
Cares about it. Nobody else.
Yeah, like they might care a bit, right? But you probably are blowing up in their mind how big a deal it is to them.
Absolutely. No, that was brilliant, Paul. I think we'll wrap up this podcast here. I think we covered a lot of topics, and hopefully it's helped a lot of competitors out there, but more specifically us females, because I feel like this is not spoken about enough, and I'm so glad that we can provide this platform to speak about it. And thanks to Paul as well for helping so many athletes. And us bikini girls, we're hard work, but it's worth it in the end. It is worth it in the end. Honestly, I don't know how Ross does it. I don't know how Cal does it, deals with us, and even you. I'm like, every time I text you, I'm like, Paul, can we have a call? I'm like, oh, he's thinking it's not her again.
She never messages just to have a coffee and a catch up, you know.
just a breakdown.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, thank you so much for your time, Paul. Can you let listeners know where to find you if they want your services or your advice, or just to be nosy?
Yeah, just to be nosy. So the easiest place of getting hold of me is Instagram. So if you just search Paul Standell, Standell, you will find me. Or you can find the company stuff at the PT Project. Most of that is biomechanics based rather than the stuff we're talking about. So if this stuff has resonated with you, pop onto my Instagram, drop me a DM. You can find the ebook through the link in my link tree, that type of stuff. Reach out to Grace or Jade. They can always put you in touch with me as well if you wanted to kind of talk more. But thanks very much for having me on, guys.
Thank you so much, Paul. We'll catch you in the next episode, guys. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.